Let's go ahead and call this committee meeting to order. This is the initial meeting of the Senate Interim Committee on the Sanctity of Life. I want to thank everybody for being here today. This is obviously a new committee that was put together by leadership in the Senate. I want to thank everyone for their participation in being on this committee. We do have some people on by phone. Before we get started, I do want to go ahead and take roll. Not sure who that was on the phone. Can we go ahead and take roll?
Schaefer.
Here.
Sater.
Here.
Onder.
Here.
Schmidt.
Here.
Kehoe.
Here.
Riddle. Here. Shoup. Chappelle-Nadell.
Aye.
Laboda.
All right, with that, we do have a quorum. This committee was put together last week, in large part, really almost entirely in response to what has become a national issue with the attention to one video and then another video that were released nationally disclosing high-level executives at Planned Parenthood apparently making admissions of certain practices, and arguably those videos were taken in other states, at least that's our understanding at this point, but it raised the question of, in the state of Missouri, whether or not those practices are in fact taking place in the state of Missouri. And because those videos will be key to a lot of things that we're looking at in this committee, we did go back and forth on whether or not we would go ahead and show those videos in this committee. For brevity of time, what we've done is we do have transcripts, both of the July 25th, 2014 video of Deborah Nucatola, who's a doctor and Senior Director of Medical Services for the Planned Parenthood Federation of America, as well as the February 6, 2015 video of Mary Gatter, MD, who is President of Medical Director of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America and also serves in a capacity locally at a facility in California. The issue that's raised in those videos is whether or not there is activity taking place by Planned Parenthood which on multiple levels would, on its face, if true in the state of Missouri, would violate multiple felony and misdemeanor provisions. And as a committee concerned with the integrity of the laws of the state of Missouri and the sanctity of life, it is our obligation to determine through the investigative process that we can conduct as legislators whether or not those practices are in fact occurring in the state of Missouri. And that really results in two things depending on what we find out. If there is a need for a change in the law based on the facts that we find out on what's occurring in the state of Missouri, then we will make those recommendations to our legislative colleagues and move forward. Also, on July 15th, I sent a letter to the Attorney General of the state of Missouri outlining at least 4 felonies that, if those admissions on the videotapes are in fact true and occurring in the state of Missouri, would violate criminal laws in the state of Missouri, and asking the Attorney General both on a legal and a moral level to investigate those. I do know that they've received that letter, and it's my understanding that they're looking at that. But obviously, anything that were to be developed by this committee in terms of facts that we find and ultimately a report that we put out by the end of December would be relevant to also share with the Attorney General to make sure that the Attorney General is apprised of all facts, at least as we find them in this committee. The information that's disclosed in the video appears to show several issues of concern for laws in the state of Missouri. One, whether or not body parts harvested from babies who are aborted are being sold or transferred for profit, regardless of what that money is being spent for, and I'm assuming that will be an issue also that comes up in this committee. But if that is in fact occurring, that is a violation of multiple laws, including criminal laws in the state of Missouri. The other issue is it shows a lot of gaps in the law in the state of Missouri on where protocols exist, where they don't exist, and how there's verification of certain procedures to in fact make sure. Because one issue that comes up from what we've seen in the video is there an immediate answer? And the answer to that question is no, there's not, because there's not a lot of verification on certain procedures that already under law are required to take place. The other big issue that comes out of that video, if in fact those admissions are correct, or they're true and they're applying in the state of Missouri, is the issue of whether or not women who go in for a procedure are being told in fact that they're receiving one procedure, but in fact another procedure that they are not being informed of is what's being performed in order to harvest organs or preserve organs so that they have a higher dollar value or a market value at all. And that is the other issue that we'll look at in this committee. Because I do know, for example, when women do receive certain services, they do sign a number of waivers and other documents, but we have very strong limitations in the state of Missouri on what the mother, frankly, as the agent or not as the agent for the child can even agree to. And I think that's another issue for this committee that it's not readily apparent, even though we have those state laws, of what actually is transpiring when these transactions take place. So with that said, it will be the goal of this committee to use all the resources we have at our disposal, including compelling testimony and compelling production of documents, and putting all the resources we have together to determine what exactly is occurring in the state of Missouri, whether these practices are condoned or being done in part in the state of Missouri, or there is some aspect of them being performed in the state of Missouri. And I intend that through the hard work of this committee, and I know everyone on this committee is dedicated to working hard to make sure we protect the integrity of the laws of the state of Missouri and the lives of citizens of the state of Missouri, that we will do our utmost to find the facts and make full recommendations to the legislature and additionally to the Attorney General if necessary. I want to give anyone else the ability to make a comment if they want to make a comment. Senator Sater.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for having this meeting today. And I look forward to getting to the bottom of several questions that I have, and I know the rest of the committee may have. One of the things that has been disturbing is the permit process that the Department of Health went through in giving a permit to the Columbia Planned Parenthood. I'm a little unsure of exactly what happened there, and I think we need to have some witnesses from the Department of Health to fully explain what happened in that procedure.
And that raises the issue, and for those of you on the committee or otherwise who watched this, it was somewhat ironic that within a 24-hour period, it appears that the Planned Parenthood facility in Columbia was issued a license, which they have not had in a few years, to resume abortion procedures, both medical and surgical. And then the video really came out and gained national attention the following day. And I think that was just fortuitousness that brought those things together to shed light on a lot of things that otherwise maybe a lot of people would not have seen. But I think in that respect, it is relevant. And I did have several conversations with the governor's office over the weekend. I did ask for someone from the Department of Health and Senior Services to be here to answer questions specifically on the issuance of that license. And in all fairness, I did talk to them late last week and over the weekend, and they were concerned about the short notice. And my response to them was, you can produce somebody today, or you're going to produce them, 2 weeks from now, but someone's going to have to come in and tell us the rationale behind that. Do we have anybody here from the Department of Health today who's here to answer that question? Yes, sir.
I am there. I'm the liaison to the department. I do not think I have enough information to adequately answer
Okay.
questions, but what I can do is make sure that any questions that are posed today get back to Gail.
Okay. All right. We may want to have you come up to the microphone in just a minute. Let's go ahead and see if anybody else has any other comments, and then we'll go to that issue. Senator Riddle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do also want to ditto what Senator Sater has said. My concerns are with the Columbia Center. It is my understanding that they had to make some upgrades, to which I'm not sure have happened, before a license could be.
There was
administered.
litigation pending in 2010. It was after the law was changed to require that facilities that provide abortion services be licensed as an ambulatory surgical center. And the question was that the Columbia facility, and arguably the St. Louis facility, did not meet those requirements and would need to upgrade. There was a settlement agreement entered into by the state of Missouri and Planned Parenthood. I think Planned Parenthood was paid somewhere in the neighborhood of $145,000 out of the legal expense fund. The settlement agreement was signed by Planned Parenthood, by the Attorney General, by Health and Senior Services, and by various prosecutors in a couple different counties, including Dan Knight, who's a prosecutor in Boone County. I think it was Matt Knatzer at the time, who was a prosecutor also. And that document purports to lay out what requirements are necessary at the facility, particularly in Columbia, but also St. Louis, before that facility would, in fact, be in compliance with that statutory ambulatory surgery center requirement.
In order for them to get a license.
To get a license, correct. And there's an attachment to that settlement, which is attachment A, which lays some of that out. And I know that a lot of people have a lot of questions of whether or not those changes were made, because I do know, and I've heard from people, and we'll have to verify if this is correct, but a lot of changes that appear to be required by the settlement agreement were not made, and yet the license was issued. And I think that's why, in all fairness, we need to hear from the Department of Health and find out if they're aware, in fact, of the settlement agreement, of the statutory changes, as well as the pending regulations that went in place with that statute, and whether or not those things were examined at the time that was issued.
My other question is, what do they do with the human fetus remains? I asked that question to Planned Parenthood several years ago and never got an answer.
And I think that that's one thing, and I alluded to that in the introduction. I think when you look at the requirements, and there certainly are statutory requirements on how babies that are aborted are to be handled, and there's a process for that, but after a certain step, there is an ambiguity in what happens after that, as well as the fact that there does not appear to be a verification process really in place that shows that was complied with. And I think on top of that, while you have facilities that arguably are the ones that are responsible for complying with that, you have individuals who perform procedures that there may not be protocols in place to verify that those individuals are in fact complying with the procedures that the facility itself agreed to under the law. And I think that that's another issue that when I talked about those gaps that appear to exist in protocols and verification process, I think that's one of the things that definitely comes up there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Chairman.
Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you for calling a meeting so quickly after the committee was formed. And I think a lot of the questions that have been raised deserve a lot of answers. And I think that for me, like so many Missourians watching the videos last week and 2 weeks ago, and there may be more videos, I guess, being released, but to see the cavalier nature in which senior leaders of Planned Parenthood talked about crushing an unborn child above the heart, lungs, and liver, and below to preserve them as what was described for sale. All of this being discussed in between sips of wine and bites of salad is sickening, and it shocks the conscience, and would be more believable, in my view, if read in a science fiction novel or some other work of fiction, but indeed is being done and promoted, according to these videos, by a federally funded organization who, by their own admission, describes this as a common practice. This idea that Planned Parenthood is systematically and meticulously harvesting organs from babies for profit is a terrible revelation and shows a complete, utter, and unequivocal disregard for human life. Missourians deserve to know whether or not this practice is taking place here in our state, and it is my intention, and I know members of this committee, to get to the bottom of whether that indeed is happening. And make no mistake, if you are part of this apparatus in our state, this committee is committed, I think, to letting the facts and the evidence lead us to wherever that leads us. So I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this committee to order so quickly.
Thank you. And I do want to point out one thing that is shocking about the video is a former death penalty prosecutor who has, in fact, had videotape confessions as part of murder trials in the past. The human response when you watch one of those videotape confessions is the absolute disregard for the circumstance that someone created and the disregard for human life. And the one thing in watching this video that was more poignant for me than I think any other aspect was the exact same callous disregard for human life in discussing harvesting organs and crushing a baby above or below its abdomen in order to preserve the monetary value of the organs, which were then to be sold. It is unbelievable. The national outrage over that should be much stronger than it is. It's no different than any other murder case that I've dealt with, where you look at a defendant talking about how callously they destroyed human life over salad, over eating. It's absolutely disgusting. Senator Onder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, with regard to your final remark, I have not been a prosecutor, but in my medical training, I've interviewed sociopaths, and I have to agree that video, both of those videos were very reminiscent of interviews I've had with sociopaths as they described taking human life, or in other ways committing violence against human persons, and it's despicable. The demeanor, the lack of professionalism of both of those so-called doctors is more reminiscent of of Dr. Mengele's behavior at Auschwitz than it is of a modern medical professional. But I'd like to echo your concerns about the possibility that the probability from looking at some of these videos that one or more laws was broken. Of course, both the federal government and Missouri have laws against partial birth abortion. In Missouri, that's contained at Section 565.300. In the first video, Dr. Nucatala very clearly describes manipulating the baby into a position so the baby, which would normally be in the head first position for delivery, would be manipulated into a breech position so the baby could be pulled out and that organs such as liver and heart and lung could be intact. Presumably the death blow there would be administered as it would be in other partial birth abortions with scissors to the back of the head. That's partial birth abortion. That's illegal under state and federal law. I wonder also, Dr. Nucatala in the first video describes going to great lengths to deliver a, quote, intact calvarium ahead. Well, now, if Dr. Nucatala just described to us how she goes out of her way to avoid crushing the torso or the abdomen to salvage organs, and she's also going out of the way to salvage the calvarium, it means she's delivering a live baby, in which case she'd be violating, on the federal level, the Born Alive Infants Protection Act of 2002. Missouri, she would be violating Section 188.035, which reads, whoever with intent to do so shall take the life of a child aborted alive shall be guilty of murder in the second degree. It's clear, too, that if proper informed consent was not provided, we would have battery on these women. It's pretty clear that both Nucatala and Gatter describe modifying the procedure. In the one case, converting the baby to a breech position. Mary Gatter very colorfully said that in order to get more intact tissue, you might use a, quote, less crunchy technique. And she further said that, I don't think the patients would care one iota. Well, Dr. Gatter, so-called, might not care one iota, but this could be a violation of informed consent in violation of Missouri law, as well as in violation of medical ethics. And then, of course, all the issues surrounding selling baby body parts for valuable consideration, the issues that Senator Riddle raised about disposition of aborted babies. And one final thing I'd note from the first video, Dr. Nucatala recommends to the actors posing as fetal parts dealers, suggests that the St. Louis clinic might be one that would be particularly amenable to helping them collect fetal parts for research. So I think there's a direct, not only is the whole video a smoking gun, but there's specific link to the Planned Parenthood clinic on Forest Park Avenue and its affiliated research university. And I would also I would too echo the concerns about the issuance of the license to the Columbia Planned Parenthood abortion clinic. It appears that was done in violation of Missouri law and regulations, and again, I think the Department of Health needs to give us an explanation for that and probably revoke that license. So again, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your work on this committee thus far, and I look forward to getting to the bottom of this and see that justice is done, and that women are being treated with respect, with dignity, and not just used as repositories of fetal body parts for research. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I want to add one comment. And based on what we've already heard in graphic detail as to nationwide what they're talking about with preserving organs of these tiny babies, When women go into these clinics in a traumatic situation, do you understand that they never hear the word fetus, they never hear the word baby, they never hear the word human? What they hear is tissue only. I have toured Planned Parenthood in Columbia, and in all of our conversations, they never one time referred to a human being. It is always couched under tissue, and I believe that they try to hide the truth from women, and I think it's wrong, and I hope that this committee does everything that we can in our power to protect the women of this state, not only our young, silent victims, but the women who are being lied to. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sater.
Just one more comment, well, for right now, at least. You know, we do have a anatomical gift act in statute, and it appears that the statute says that a mother cannot donate the body parts. It appears that way. Now, they can, if it's a natural causes, they can, of course. But an abortion, they cannot. But I want to make sure that that is nailed down tight to where you understand.
Right, and I think that leads us to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is there's a lot of documentation that goes along with this that I think a lot of people are unaware of in terms of what documents are signed as part of the procedure, what waivers are given, what waivers are purported to be in compliance with the law in the state of Missouri. And I think that part of what this committee will do is get those documents to make sure that we do, in fact, we can make our own determination of whether or not people are being misled, women are being misled, whether or not there's an attempt to get around the Uniform Donation Act by purporting to give the ability of an agent to donate when that agent doesn't have the ability to make that determination. So I think those are the things we need to do. One thing I would like to do with the concurrence of the committee is we will schedule our next meeting. It's probably going to be a couple of weeks because a lot of people are going to be out of town. But I would like to move forward immediately with some document requests. And,
Mr. Chairman?
oh, Senator Kehoe, go ahead.
Sorry, just before you get to that meat of the part, I just want to say quickly, it's unbelievable that I would have an opportunity to be on a committee with such passionate and talented people, such as yourselves. And we all spend a lot of time out in our districts talking to Missourians. And I just want to follow up on a comment you made, and I would agree with you, Mr. Chairman, that the national outrage should be 500 times more than it is. But I can tell you the Missouri outrage is unbelievable. I mean, there is not a place I go, and I would venture to say any member of that committee who spend a lot of time out in the districts where they don't hear, at first people were saying this must be kind of some sick joke or horror film. They just were that much in disbelief because Missourians have different values, in my opinion, than some parts of the other country, and they are absolutely coming unglued, and they are horrified. And I believe they want and depend on this committee and its members to bring this to some certainty with some facts out and find out what's going on. And if anything was going on, like we saw in the video, to absolutely put the most abrupt stop to the fullest extent of the law possible. And I hear that everywhere from Missouri.
Well, thank you very much, Senator. I certainly have heard that from both within my district and from all corners of the state, and I agree with you. Well, I do want to go ahead and say basically what we need to do is, oh, is anyone else on the phone?
Yes, Senator Chappelle is all. I'm on the phone and I'm listening, and I too want to know what is actually happening. Of course, we come from different perspectives, but I think that we all deserve to know what the truth is so that we can move forward.
Thank you very much, Senator, and that is the objective of this committee. So I appreciate your comment. So with that, I do think before we're able to meet again, which again will probably be a couple of weeks and we'll get that set, we do need to go ahead and get some requests for production of documents out so that the next time we meet, we can use our time most productively to have documents, have time before that meeting to evaluate what's in there. So with that, we will start working on requests and who those requests will be made to. I certainly don't expect that to be the only request for documents. And obviously, once we've had a chance to see some of those documents, we'll have the ability to make a better determination of who it is we would actually like to hear from in the committee and ask questions of.
Mr. Chairman, do we have subpoena power?
Yes, we do, Senator.
Okay.
Okay, Department of Health and Senior Services. if you would come up, please, and tell us your name and tell us your position with the department. And I understand maybe you can't answer all of our questions. I know we have a lot of questions, but I would expect that someone in the department is going to be able to answer our questions. Is the little green light on?
Now it is.
There you go.
My name is Stephen Allen Ramsey, and I'm the department liaison for the Department of Health and Senior Services. Gail Basterling would like to have been here, but she's currently at a conference over in D.C., and our OGC is currently unavailable. So I hope that I can at least get the questions that you all have down, and so I can start working on those answers. But really, I'm not sure if I'll be able to answer.
Okay, and so obviously you were sitting there and you heard some of our discussion about the license that was recently issued to the facility in Columbia. What's the date on that license? Do you know?
The date on the license? I'm not 100% sure. I believe it was in July of this year.
It was.
But I'm not sure of the exact date.
Okay. Were you at all involved in the issuance of that license?
No. My first, I guess, encounter with it was when Senator Kehoe, I believe, reached out and was asking questions and wanting to talk about that via the constituent side of that. So that's when I first became aware that this was an issue, and then the news story broke the next day.
Okay. Let me ask you this, since you are the liaison. When an application such as that one, the application comes in for the license, who actually within the Department of Health processes that license?
I believe it would be one of our folks in the Division of Regulation and Licensure. I want to say it's John Langston, but I'm not 100% certain. But I do know it would start off in the Division of Regulation and Licensure, I believe, for the application part. And then this one was a little bit different because there is the settlement agreement, and so our OGC was involved later on. But if it's just an initial regulation and licensure standpoint, it's going to come from that division within the department.
Okay. Have you seen that license yourself?
The one that was just released? I've seen the picture of it, yeah. So, yeah, I guess I've seen the attachment.
And who from the Department of Health actually signed?
I believe that's going to be John. I'm fairly certain, but I don't want to give you improper information. Just from my recollection, I think it was John Langston.
Okay. I have more questions, but I do want to see if anyone else has any. I'll keep going. Let me ask you this. So do you know, did the department evaluate the requirements of the 2010 settlement agreement with Planned Parenthood before that license was issued?
Do I know the extent of the...
Do you know, was there any evaluation of the settlement agreement at all that you're aware of before that license was issued?
I can't say definitively, but I believe that was in the conversation going forward before that licensure was, I guess, was allowed. So I think that was in the conversation. To what extent, I can't tell you for certainty.
Okay. Senator Sater.
Did the Columbia Planned Parenthood facility, did they perform abortions at one time in the past?
I am unsure. I would imagine so at some point in the past, but I can't answer that question.
And so their permit or their license expired when they stopped doing the abortions. Is that correct?
I believe that whatever type of licensure they did have was put on hold with the settle agreement until the pieces of that settle agreement were satisfied, or the conditions on which the settlement agreement was put forth were satisfied. So I'm not exactly sure, judging by your face, I'm not answering your question directly, but I think what occurred was at some point, whether it was 2010, 2011, the settle agreement happened.
Right.
And I guess at this point it seems that those conditions perhaps were satisfied before this issuance, or at least that's probably what's going on. I'm not 100%.
I guess my question is, if it expired, wouldn't you have to go through the process of reapplying instead of renewing? And that's...
Yeah, that is
Okay.
the question, so I'm not exactly sure.
Since
whether
it
or not
happened
we
so
went
quickly, it sounds like they renewed rather than they reapply.
Going
than
through
they
the
applied.
entire process.
Go through the entire process. Okay, thanks.
Let me ask you this. Do you know, did the department make a determination of whether or not that settlement would apply to the facility if they were performing medically induced abortions as opposed to surgically induced abortions?
I did not hear that distinction. But from my 10,000-foot level, I didn't hear that distinction in the conversation.
Okay. Is it your understanding, though, that under the license that Planned Parenthood in Columbia will resume both medically induced abortions and at some point in the near future surgically induced abortions?
I am not sure as to the extent of the licensure, but if that's what the license...
I'll tell you, that's my understanding of the
Okay.
license. I'm just seeing if that's anything that you know about with the license. And again, I understand that you are here, but you are the person that's here for the Department of Health and Senior Services. So you don't know the answer to that
I
question?
do not know the answer to that
Okay.
question.
And so if in fact, my understanding is correct, and they will be performing surgically induced abortions, do you know who the physician is that will be performing that service?
I do not personally, but I believe the department does.
Okay.
But I do not.
Do you know where that physician will have medical privileges, at what hospital or facility in Columbia?
I do not.
And I know that you don't know the answer to all these questions, and that's fair enough. But in asking you these questions, and I know you're taking notes
I
there,
am.
these are things that really probably within the next week, I think would be a reasonable amount of time that you could get answers back. And the best way to do that is to provide that to my office, and then we'll give it to everyone on the committee. I mean, you can send it directly to everyone on the committee if you want, but it's probably a little more efficient if you give it to us and then we distribute it.
Excellent.
Senator Riddle? Well, you go, because I could keep us here all day.
I have some questions about the facility itself. When I went through that, it had, I was not allowed to see the machine that they used to perform the abortions. They told me that by law, they couldn't show it to me. However, I learned after the fact that they had shown it to volunteers. I want to know what is used. Are you aware of what type of ultrasound machine they have in the facility?
I am not.
Okay, when I went, I asked to see where was the monitor. There was no monitor, so they couldn't see the heart, the fetus. I asked to see the volume control. Where's the volume control? There was no volume control. So what type of machine are they using to show women what stage they are and to let them see that there actually is a beating heartbeat or not? I asked if they offered any kind of counseling for the medical type of abortion where they are offered the pills, one that starves the baby, the next that aborts the baby, and how they prepare the women to understand what's going to happen to them physically and emotionally, and what did they do when women showed up with their tiny baby in a Ziploc bag? What were they supposed to do? I also asked where our baby's remains were examined. Did not like the answer to that. I heard it was on a counter behind the front desk. So I would question the medical procedures that are being used. I asked about counseling in general, and my response was, I guess they can come back if they want to. So there are physical ramifications as well as emotional that women have the right to be made aware of. I know that they are offered a packet. We saw to that by law that they got to have a packet that indicated pictures and information. But I question whether they are surgically following procedure as they should. And when women are told that it's nothing more than tissue, but then when you hear on a videotape they're talking about specific organs, that would lead all of us to believe that they are hiding the truth from women.
And I don't know if you know the answer to this question. For the license for the St. Louis facility, who are the doctors listed as the providers there? Are you aware of who they are?
I am not.
Okay, well, I'd like to know who that are and where, in fact, they have privileges at what hospital. Thank you.
Senator Onder?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are you aware of the deficiencies at this Columbia clinic that in the past led to its denial of a license as an ambulatory surgery center?
I am not aware of the conditions that led to a denial. I briefly glanced over the settlement agreement, so I saw some of those conditions, like the size of the hallways and so on and so forth, but I don't know if there's a distinction between the two.
Okay, yeah. So you have seen the settlement agreement.
Very briefly.
And hallways needed to be widened, other changes needed to be made. Have you been to the Columbia Abortion Clinic facility? Are you aware of whether those changes have been made?
I am not personally aware. No.
Are you aware of whether Planned Parenthood represented to the department that those changes had been made?
I am not personally aware.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So as you can see, there's an awful lot of questions this committee has on that particular permit. because obviously the timing is very important of that, given what we're looking at, and the fact that what we're already looking at with at least one facility, and possibly what may have happened in the past at the Columbia facility, is now something that potentially is going to be an issue on a more immediate basis with the Columbia facility. So we would like the answers to those questions back before the end of the week if possible, and we will expect that. What I want to go ahead and do is I do have a copy of the settlement agreement, and I didn't have it in the packet today, but I do want to go ahead and get that settlement agreement to everyone on the committee. And then also, I mentioned we do have transcripts of both the videotapes that I outlined at the beginning. These transcripts appear to me to be as accurate as they can be, given having seen the entirety of those videos. But what I don't want to get into is a debate on editing or some other issue. It's why we put the transcript out, so everyone can see exactly the statements that were made. And ultimately, we may watch all of the videos, but I think the transcripts, if someone has a problem with one of the transcripts, please let us know, and we will do our best to fix anything that may not be accurate. But to the best of my knowledge, looking at these transcripts, these are accurate transcripts of what's discussed on those tapes. So I wanted to get that to everybody in the committee, especially the one is fairly lengthy. It was long. It was a long video, a long interview. And so before we come back next time, everyone will have the chance to read those. Does anyone on the phone have any comments? Because I think we're about to wrap it up here. With the understanding that as we move forward, we now have a foundation, a basis. We've got the committee seated. Everyone has expressed, at least on an initial basis, what their concerns are. And I think that those are all very unified as we sit here on what our concerns are. And then I have no doubt that as we find out more information, people will have new concerns, and we'll deal with those as they come up. Anyone on the phone want to make any statements or have any observations?
This is Maria Chappelle-Nadella. All I would have to say is I'm interested in the information as well. I don't know this answer to what we are trying to inquire of, but I think everyone deserves to know, even though that some of us may be coming from a different perspective. So I'm on board to search, but I think when we are doing these types of investigations, this same application should happen with all communities that are dealing with life and death, not just one community of people, but all.
Thank you, Senator. And I know you couldn't be here today, so the documents that we have, we will make sure that those get to your office, as well as Senator Kehoe and the other senators that couldn't be with us. We'll go ahead and get those documents to your offices today. Does anyone have any further comments? Senator Sater.
I assume that we'll be meeting back here in Jefferson City in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I think we're going to look at that because obviously we have senators from all over the state, and so it's going to be easier to do, meetings maybe in some other places for senators. So that we want to look at that and make sure, because really the objective of the committee is to get a full and accurate representation of what in fact is occurring in the state of Missouri on this issue. So again, to the extent that we may hold hearings somewhere else, I think that's definitely an option.
I think that'd be a very good idea, and to have some more public input into the feelings.
Yeah, and it is my intention to have public testimony at some point. I think since the committee was just formed, and we're laying the foundation for really what are those questions that the revelations of these videos show. There's a lot out there that no one, regardless of where you are on this issue, seems to be able to answer. So the objective of this committee is to find out what, in fact, the truth is in the state of Missouri and what's occurring. So as we find that out, we're going to do everything that we need to do to uncover that truth. So with that, let's go ahead and adjourn. Thank you very much for your participation. We're adjourned.